We watch all the NFL games. We know the general stats. However, getting in depth and studying all the elements that go into setting a full snapshot of a player, we often learn things that stun us or surprise us. Today, we're going to look at some tight end stats that we found surprising. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Prize Picks, the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. I'm Jim Coventry, joined as always by Anthony Cervino. We'll be doing a podcast on this platform every Monday. Remember to follow Anthony at The Real NFL Guru. You can find me over at Jim Coventry NFL. Today's show will include Anthony Cervino and myself talking about tight ends that had at least one surprising stat that helped when we made our player projections. And we will start out with David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. Now, Flacco was the quarterback at the end of the season. Njoku was phenomenal. Now, the first game they played together, they did nothing. I think it was a goose egg. But then once they got going, here was their 4-game average. Njoku, 7 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. That was an average. Without Flacco, a lot of Deshaun Watson, a bunch of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and others. That 7 catches went down to 4.5. Those 90 yards with Flacco went down to 42. And that touchdown per game, 0.17 touchdown. Now, Deshaun Watson is expected to be healthy, starting the season out. We know Cooper is his main target, Amari Cooper, in the offense. What are we expecting with David Njoku after he showed us what he's capable of, but we also saw what it would be like when there is no Joe Flacco?
You know, past 2 seasons for Njoku, he's finished as a tight end 7 in fantasy points per game last year, tight end 8 in that category in 2022. The big thing is Deshaun Watson. As you said, Watson's top target is Amari Cooper. And there's another factor this season is that the fact they also brought in Jerry Jeudy into this offense. Are they going to want to run the ball more because the offensive line is going to be healthy? Eventually, they'll be getting Nick Chubb back. I like David Njoku, but his current ADP has me running away a little bit. This season, it feels like there's a lot of good tight ends that are worth drafting, especially if you're wading into that third tier. And I think Njoku is somebody I'm going to shy away from because he did have the most of his success last year without the quarterback one on the field.
Now, when we talk about Jerry Jeudy, it's a good addition to this because last year Elijah Moore had 104 targets, but he was only 30th percentile or so after the catch. But Elijah Moore only caught about half of his passes. Now, you could say some of that was bad quarterback play, but the yards after the catch, you might be able to say some passes were thrown behind him, but clearly the team was not happy with him. Well, Jerry Jeudy may not have done much in Denver, but that 30th percentile yard after the catch for Elijah Moore, it was 86th percentile with Jeudy. And then after the Browns acquired him, they quickly signed him to a contract. So if their goal is run after the catch, that's what they were getting from Njoku. Remember all those tight end screens we were seeing? Well, if Jeudy is what they want him to be, Njoku would, in theory, be the number 3 option in the offense, not the number 2 option that he was last year. No. So, Anthony, when you bring up the Jerry Jeudy factor, if that does work out, then you're right. Njoku is not worth the ADP. What about the fantasy managers, Anthony, that have given up on Jeudy? They think he is no good. He'll never be any good. And even though he's the number 2 here, if that's the belief, how should fantasy managers in that situation approach Njoku?
I don't mind drafting David Njoku. I just don't know if I'm going to take him at his current cost. And using underdog, since it's one tight end, his ADP is 101.4. I would wait a little bit. If you can get him a round or so later, then fine, you can draft him. But I would say this to anybody doubting Jerry Jeudy, because I'm one of them. I was never a big Jerry Jeudy guy. This is a change of scenery. He's entering a situation to where you can make the case that whether it's Jameis Winston or Deshaun Watson, this is probably the best quarterback tandem that Jerry Jeudy's ever going to catch a pass from since he's been in the NFL. This is also one of the better offensive scenarios he's been since he's been in the NFL. So this change of scenery could be just what Jerry Jeudy needed to get his career on track.
All right, let's move to Evan Engram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Engram, in the 6 games that Christian Kirk missed, Evan Engram was a monster. 8.6 catches. Think about that. 8.6, 73 yards. And that was a stunning stat line. And he averaged 10 targets a game. Obviously, you're catching 8.6. That's really efficient as well. Evan Engram, up to that point before Kirk got hurt, was just a basic floor play. He would catch you a decent number of passes, moderate yardage, nothing special. I remember talking about him weekly last year. But he was like a league winner type at tight end. Christian Kirk is back. The other receiver side doesn't matter. It goes from Calvin Ridley and now Brian Thomas is there. So they still have that role settled. How are you viewing Engram after he comes up that monster finish to the season?
You know, Engram, PPR, tight end 2 overall, and the tight end 4 in fantasy points per game. I don't know if we're going to get that again from Evan Engram because he was very injury dependent. But where he's going, using the best ball underdog ADP, tight end 8 off the board, I think that's about right, because if you look at Evan Engram, his first year in this offense coming over from the Giants in 2022, he finished as a tight end 7 in fantasy points per game. So I think where you're drafting him is very, very safe, to where even if he doesn't see the type of volume and efficiency that he saw last year with Christian Kirk on the sideline, I think where we know where the floor is, and I think the floor in this offense is what he gave us 2 years ago.
Now, this is a lateral point. We have no way to quantify it. Press Taylor, in my mind, was a horrible offensive coordinator. Didn't stack plays, didn't optimize players, but they threw the ball short a ton. Now, I know they did throw downfield stuff to Ridley, but it was like low percentage stuff. It wasn't like schemed up. And so there was a lot of underneath stuff. Narrative, right? We don't know what's going to happen. I have to think, and I've heard some whispers, Doug Peterson is likely to grab onto the offense here. He has to know, Doug Peterson, that if this offense or team does not work out, him and the entire staff are gone. He has to know that. Is there any upside beyond what we thought for this offense should Peterson take over?
In terms of if it's not Press Peterson's calling the shots, do I think this offense could get back on track to where it was in year 1 with Trevor Lawrence? I do. But I think that's a big if, because What if Peterson doesn't take over right away? What if he said, okay, let's see what Press Taylor has, and then a month into the season, they're struggling, and Doug Peterson takes over the reins? So I think that plays a role on when this happens.
So if we get some clarity, it's going to not be till training camp. At this point, there's going to be no relevant news. Yeah. And again, I've read whispers where Peterson's going to do that. But like Anthony said, we don't really know until we're much, much closer to things. And that's something to be cognizant of, because Peterson is a very good offensive designer. And the fact he can sit around and watch Press Taylor mess up what Peterson is able to do, that has been very stunning to watch in real time. But there is hope. And that even goes to Trevor Lawrence, that if this offense gets optimized, I said where receivers are being used to do the damage they can do, we can see another level of this offense. But at this point, we nervously wait. Third tight end, Travis Kelce. Now, we don't know the deal last year. There are a couple things that he was injured early in the season. We don't know how long it took him to be 100% from that. We talk all the time about players over 30 and recovery from injury. Look, if you look at the player ages of the skill positions outside a quarterback in the league, there are very few players over 31 years old. Now, tight ends tend to age pretty gracefully. Kelce, though, when he was needed, I'm going to circle back. One more thing I want to point out. because the receiver room in Kansas City was not threatening to opposing defenses, teams could gang up on Kelce more than ever. So whether he was not playing at 100%, whether he was ganged up on more than usual and didn't allow him to get yards after the catch, those are factors. But then we saw in the NFL playoffs, 4 games, teams hyper specifically targeting Kelce. And Kelce comes out and averages 21.5 PPR points in 4 NFL playoff games. So to me, that's a very positive sign. And then we say Xavier Worthy comes in, speed to stretch the defense. Marquise Brown, speed and route diversity. Defenses are not going to likely be able to come in and say, we're throwing everybody at Kelce, because the whole point of 2 highs that really were first used to slow down Mahomes, with that speed, they're not going to be able to flood the middle of the field. Thoughts, Anthony?
I'd like to think that Kelce's regression last year, because he had an un-Kelce-like season. He was a tight end 3 overall in PPR, tight end 1 of fantasy points per game at 14.6. We're normally used to seeing Kelce 18 fantasy points per game, 16. So it was a little bit of a regression last year. And I'd like to think it's because of that lower body injury suffered in the preseason. It probably lingered. Now, one thing that does stick out to me when you talk about, well, Kelce looked like himself in the postseason, and maybe there's a reason why. And the reason why could be, well, week 18, if you look, Kelce did not play. They gave him that week off. Maybe he got healthy. Maybe he needed that rest because he came off that rest week absolutely on fire. Kelce right now going as a tight end 2 off the board. I've said it all off season. If his price doesn't adjust and I can continue to get Travis Kelce, he's going in early 4th round in some spots. I'm going to keep hammering him. I'm going to have overexposure to Travis Kelce because I believe he's still the tight end 1 of fantasy football. And I still think he has some elite seasons left.
As you say that, Anthony, I've always said I rarely take tight ends early. I don't like my roster builds when it happens that way. I like to have depth at running back and wide receiver. Injuries are always a big issue with that. But when you're saying Kelce, late 3rd, early 4th, there's a point where the value is too good to pass up on. And like you, I do believe what we saw in the playoffs is still a healthy player who can contribute. Yes, if he gets nicked up, there could be problems recovering again from further injuries. But I really do believe, as I said earlier, Andy Reid is going to come out with a much more aggressive passing attack because of the speed they infuse into the offense. And I think that only creates more space for Kelce and really the less bodies, the less big hits. I overall, like you, Anthony, if I'm going to spend an early pick on a tight end, it is going to be Kelce. Yes. And I know people are all over Sam LaPorta. I get it. He goes a little earlier. LaPorta had 10 touchdowns. And LaPorta was like 28th percentile after the catch. Very great player. Don't misconstrue me on that. But he cannot access the type of numbers that a healthy Kelce can. And I think that's the end of the story on that. Hey, level up this year's fantasy football draft and make Stadium Swim your number 1 pick. Stadium Swim at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas is America's favorite place to watch sports. 3 levels, 6 pools, and a 143-foot screen. It's the place to bring your league this season. Blow this year's draft out of the water with Stadium Swim's complete draft package. Make your picks poolside from the comfort of a temperature-controlled cabana with a custom Stadium Swim draft board and more. Plus, when you book a draft this season at Stadium Swim, your league will be entered to win the ultimate draft experience in 2025. The best league name wins it all. Don't miss out on all the fantasy football fun. Stadium Swim is a 21 and up venue. For all the details and to reserve your spot today, go to circalasvegas.com. Anthony, next player is Trey McBride. And look, Trey McBride, the first 6 weeks of the season, it was 5 or 6. It was Zach Ertz. I don't understand why they had Zach Ertz trotted out there. He couldn't run the year before. He had the ACL injury. He could run even less after that, but they still made him the guy. Finally, they just pushed him aside and eventually let him go from the team. Trey McBride steps in, and Trey McBride was dominant. But here's what I want you to know. McBride did not have more than 48 yards in any of the last 3 games, and he was dominant before that. That was the stat that was interesting to me. People are making him the tight end 3 in a lot of drafts. Here's my pushback. Trey McBride, for a long period of time, was the team's number one pass catcher. Michael Wilson was hurt. Marquise Brown was hurt. He had a heel injury. He missed time as well. This year, the offense is going to be different. Marvin Harrison is going to be the alpha receiver, the number one, no questions asked. Michael Wilson, not only did he put up good yardage in 5 of his first 8 games, but after he got back from his injury, the first 2 games he did nothing with Kyler Murray. It was clear he was working his way back. But in the last 2 games, he averaged, Michael Wilson did, 53 yards in those last 2 games. In my mind, Trey McBride's a very good tight end. He's not the number 1 option anymore. He's probably the number 3 option, and that does not make you the tight end 3. People are remembering the numbers, but I don't think the numbers tell the story, Anthony.
No, absolutely not. And I like how you brought up all of these additions because it is going to take away from Trey McBride. McBride only had 6.2 targets per game. So it's not like, he was getting targeted 9-8 times a game like we see some of these tight end ones go. So how much is he actually going to lose? Because I think that's going to really tear him down. You look at Harrison. They brought in Zay Jones. I think bringing in Zay Jones tells us a lot because he's a very good wide receiver. He's not great at anything special, but I think he's very good, and he's going to have a role in this offense. You bring up Michael Wilson. So where does Trey McBride sit? Because he did pop last year, extremely volume dependent. He was a number 1 tight end in terms of target rate. Drafting him as a tight end 3 when we just talked about Travis Kelce, guys like Mark Andrews, who I have ranked as my tight end 2. I think you have him there as well. I can't stomach drafting Trey McBride this early. I'll take Dalton Kincaid. I think there's a greater path for Dalton Kincaid to finish ahead of Trey McBride because Kincaid does have a realistic shot to be number 1 or number 2 on his own team in targets. For McBride, barring injury, I think he might be 3rd on his team in targets. And like you said, last year, There were times he was number 1. We're looking at a situation where he could be 3 because this is an offense. I just told you that the receivers, they brought in 2 new ones. Well, we know James Conner can also catch out of the backfield.
I want to add something about Conner. So Conner was a nothing as a receiver last year, but I want everybody to understand this.
He can do it.
A lot of the season was backup quarterbacks. Conner, in the last few weeks, I think it was the last 3 games, he had 2 games over 50 receiving yards with Kyler Murray. So understand, like Anthony said, Conner can catch with Kyler Murray. He will get targets and he will gain yards there. So I think that's a good call. But when people look at the season numbers, understand Conner's role in the first half of the season, even he was hurt in there a little bit too. But with those backup quarterbacks, he was not seeing anything in the passing game. So Anthony, it's important that you bring that point up for those who are investing in Conner. He's not a 0 in the passing game. Far from it. Sam LaPorta, who we've been talking about intermittently, is now up. And I mentioned this earlier when we talked about Kelce. LaPorta was only in the 28th percentile in yards after the catch. Now, his average depth of target was 61st percentile. So they did use him downfield. And the thing I like about LaPorta is this. Yes, they could detach him as a tight end. They also, when the Lions bunch 3 receivers to one side, they can move LaPorta out as the ISO X receiver, and he showed and Kelce does that a lot. LaPorta can thrive in that role. But this is what I want people to understand. 10 touchdowns. There are very few tight ends. I just looked at the last 5 years of tight end stats. Scoring 10 touchdowns is a very, very rare feat for a tight end. We like to think, there's guys every year. And the same thing, people with 1,000-yard tight end. Somebody came back to me with Mark Andrews and said, well, he only had 1,000-yard season. Yeah, only 5 tight ends have had 1,000-yard season in the last 5 years. So that just isn't common. So LaPorta, if he doesn't match that 10 touchdowns, he had 928 yards, top of my head, maybe close to that. It was okay, but that's not like a tight end 1 season. When you're thinking tight end 1 season, you're thinking of those 5,000-yard seasons that hit. You're thinking like Andrews had the 1,300-yard year and Kelce had a 1,200 in there. He may have had a 13 as well. When you're that potential of that level in number 1, you lap the field. You drafted Kelce in past years because you got such a big advantage on the field. LaPorta, even if he was a tight end one this year, he would not be lapping the field. I think that's my main point. It's not like, oh man, LaPorta is here and everybody else down here. I don't see that scenario in any case happening. Anthony, what are your thoughts?
When it comes to Sam LaPorta, you bring up the touchdowns is what inflated his fantasy stats, and that's true. But then I look at his opportunity metrics. 5th in targets, 6th in target share, 5th in routes run, 14th in route participation. All of this to me tells me last year was more of an outlier than what's going to happen moving forward. This is a Detroit offense who they're kind of telling us if Jameson Williams can stay healthy and not get suspended for gambling, he's going to have a larger role in this offense. Let's not forget, we're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs probably be unleashed this year. They have Montgomery. You just paid him on Ross St. Brown. This offense is loaded. So we just set up with McBride, where is he in terms of pecking order and opportunity? I'm now having that question about Sam LaPorta. Last year was probably number 2. I think this year when we look at opportunity, you have Monra St. Brown, we have Gibbs, maybe Montgomery, maybe Jameson Williams. Like LaPorta's probably 3 or 4 on this team.
And I think you bring up the main point. You bring up Jameson Williams. We don't know what he is yet. We know there's game-breaking speed potential. We saw a couple gadget plays in the playoffs and a 42-yard run against the 49ers for the touchdown. We saw that. It's a matter of can the Lions unlock him? And you're right, Anthony. He has not had a preseason. The first year he was recovering from the ACL when they drafted him. The second year, there was a gambling one, but he was available for the preseason. But Dan Campbell was on record saying, I need him to get as many preseason reps as possible. And Williams got hurt and he missed time. So he has not had a real preseason yet. So that said, he, again, super high draft pick, top 12, I believe, in his draft class. Can't remember off the top of my head, but I think he was like a 12th pick, maybe something like that. But that said, Detroit is going to want to get him involved. And if he is anything close to the player they wanted, you're right. Sam LaPorta is taking it. Amon-Ra St. Brown's not taking a hit. That's a non-starter. The chemistry he's had with Goff for years and Ben Johnson, that's not going anywhere. But that said, even if that 120 targets LaPorta said goes down to 110, 105, it's a completely different level of player. Hey, we've launched the new RotoWire Picks app. It offers recommendations and predictions for fantasy pick'em and player props on platforms like PrizePicks, BetMGM, and more, covering just about every sport. It's free to download on Apple and Android. Sign up within the app for a subscription to unlock all features. Existing RotoWire.com DFS pick subscribers get instant full access with their login. Check it out now. Just click the link in the description below if you're on YouTube, or search RotoWire Picks in the App Store. And if you're not on RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube, please consider subscribing. We really would love to have you migrate over that way for us. All right, next player, Anthony, Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts' average depth of target was 99th percentile last year under Arthur Smith. They used him so much in a downfield role. And here was the bigger problem, Anthony. The passes were coming from Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. To start, deep passes are low percentage passes. But now you take inaccurate quarterbacks throwing low percentage passes, and what does that do for Pitts? Now, Pitts, there was also whispers that he said he was never healthy from the knee injury he suffered in 2022. So he said that was an issue in 2023. We don't know that for sure, but we've heard that. But I do know, going to Zach Robinson as offensive coordinator, if he views Pitts more as a wide receivers tight end type as opposed to what Tyler Higbee was with the Rams, there is a real chance that Kyle Pitts doesn't see all those deep shots anymore. He sees a variety of targets in the route tree, and he could be completely unlocked here, Anthony.
Yeah, I'm all in. I said it all off season long since Cousins came over on this Falcons team, the offense, and let's rope Kyle Pitts in here. Gotta remember his rookie year when he came in with all that hype. I get he didn't live up to the hype in theory because he finished as a tight end 11 in fantasy points per game. He only had 1 touchdown. That is why that finish was so low. If you look at his other numbers, he was over 1,000 yards at the tight end position in his rookie year, 15.1 yards per reception. He's a very good tight end. He's a matchup nightmare. You can do a lot of things with Kyle Pitts. Last year, for example, 3rd in slot snaps, 10th in routes run. The opportunity was there for Kyle Pitts. Well, what was the issue with Kyle Pitts? Because it's not his talent, right? Catchable target rate. He was 37th at tight end. So you probably had guys like Peyton Hendershot, number 310 on the Cowboys, who had a greater catchable target rate than Kyle Pitts. Only 57 of his 89 targets were catchable, 64%. Target quality rating, 3.85, 37th at his position. Now you inherit Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins, the best quarterback by far Kyle Pitts has ever played with in that rookie year where he had almost 1,100 yards, I think Mariota. So if he can do that with Mariota, what is he going to do with Kirk Cousins in an offense that wants to throw the football under Zach Robinson? If it's ever going to happen for Kyle Pitts, it's now. This is the breakout year because I don't think if it doesn't happen this year, I think we could stick a fork in a possible breakout. But I'm all in on Kyle Pitts. We talk about how crowded this position is. I think this position is kind of misviewed by the consensus. We talk about LaPorta and Trey McBride. I'm good taking Kyle Pitts over both of them. I'm not saying draft them that early, but I would sit back and not get overzealous and wait for Kyle Pitts to fall to you.
Pitts' ADP is in such a spot where you could tell everybody's lukewarm on him. It's like tight end 6. It's where enough people are like, okay, take a shot on him here, but it's not aggressive. There's no aggressive nature built into that ADP. So if you believe in Pitts and you could get him where he's typically falling as the tight end 6, and you believe that the new offense is going to optimize him, you very likely have yourself a winning ticket. Now, Anthony, I want to circle back. You mentioned Pitts that 1,000-yard season. And I do remember that the 5 tight ends who have 1,000 yards in the last 5 years, and this for the audience, we're talking tight ends. Yeah. Obviously, Kelce's had it multiple times. Waller had it twice. Andrews had the 1,300-yard season. Kittle's had a couple of them. And then Pitts had the 1. But that's how rare 1,000-yard seasons from tight ends are. Again, I just want to make that point to everybody. So, again, when you look at players, say, oh, where are the 1,000-yard season? Yeah, well, good luck finding them unless you've got Kelce or one of the like players. Next player, Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Goedert had a career low 10 yards per reception last year. Prior years, 12.8, 14.8. Goedert, I know he missed his time, okay? And his draft cost now is reflecting that. You can get him around the 12 tight end mark. Sometimes even he'll fall a little bit. Goedert is going cheaply for a reason. He hasn't been reliable. Now, last year, I want to throw out the 10-yard per reception. I mean, I know you can't think of a number and just say goodbye, but I really feel the offense was not functioning well, especially after the first 6 weeks or 7 weeks. It was a real problem. And Goedert was not weaponized. And again, he had injuries, so I get that. But now with Kellen Moore in there, I want everybody to understand, Kellen Moore starts the opposite approach. He starts with a downfield passing attack to open up things underneath. And I know A.J. Brown will be the primary deep threat, but you have to think that with Kellen Moore's history of liking to stretch a defense, to do that with a tight end, just like we said with LaPorta, you can run Goedert on the isolated side where you have a stack on the other side with receivers. Goedert can win in those scenarios. I believe the yards per catch go up. Look, Dallas Goedert's not going to win your league. All right, understand that. But if you passed on tight end and he is available, and yes, draft a later tight end. We'll talk about names later and in other shows that you could get late to double up when he is hurt. But that said, I think Goedert does have a modicum of a decent bounce back this year.
Yeah, Goedert's a very solid pick. I'm getting him right around the 10th round in best ball drafts right now. And that's fine for a player like Dallas Goedert, who his ADP's kind of fallen back, but we were paying up for him depending on league and format the past few years. I do like Kellen Moore for Dallas Goedert. And I get like those Dallas teams that Kellen Moore were with, they didn't exactly have a wide receiver tandem like an A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, but Kellen Moore tight ends, they were always involved. And I think, for Dallas Goedert, I'm not saying you're going to draft him as a tight end 12. That's where he's going off the board right now, and you're going to get a top 5 guy. But I think Dallas Goedert will surprise some people and certainly finish in that top 8 to 10 range.
All right. We're going to take a short break and take more tight end talk in just a brief moment. All right, Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, and Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. The posted yardage projection for the 2024 season for A.J. Brown, 1,275 yards. For Justin Jefferson, 1,375. And Deontay Johnson, only 825 yards. I will be going with the more on each of these numbers. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use the code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Anthony, George Kittle, San Francisco 49ers. Last year, it was the 3rd 1,000-yard season of his career. Again, we talked about how rare those are. You really have to be an elite tight end to hit that, or just have, maybe not elite tight end has that once in his career or so. But Kittle, obviously, 3 times. But here's the amazing stat. The first 2 times Kittle passed 1,000 yards, he averaged 87 catches. He did it on 65 catches this past year. The downfield game, obviously, run after the catch. All amazing for Kittle. Anthony, with Kittle, the big thing is, we already know, you got Deebo Samuel, you've got Brandon Ayuk, you got Christian McCaffrey. Kittle's an amazing blocker when they need him to be that. There just are going to be quite a few weeks when they don't need him. And when you draft him in fantasy, and you're probably going to draft him at the tight end 5 or so, tight end, maybe even 7. No, I think he'd fall behind Pitts. Like tight end 7, you probably give him a tight end 7. No, he's fallen because of the reputation. But if you draft Kittle, I urge you, never bench him. Because the week you bench him, you have no clue when that 30-point game's coming or that 20-point game. If you draft him, just know you're going to ride the storm out. Don't draft him if you don't want to make those weekly decisions. Anthony, thoughts on Kittle coming off another 1,000-yard season?
Kittle has been terrific in fantasy when it comes to how he finishes at the end of the season. Going back to 2018, last year was his worst fantasy finish in fantasy points per game. He was a tight end 6. That was his worst. And when you look at this offense, how it performed, why he was so efficient, there's just so many guys. You can't cover them all. What I worry about, and I think you hit the nail on the head with, you can't bench him. But this is an issue when you're drafting George Kittle outside of best ball. He had 7 games last year with single-digit PPR points. So, no, you can't bench him, and it's going to be great when you're getting those 20, 25-point weeks. But what are you going to do in those weeks where he's giving you 4.9, 6, 1.9, 1.1, 4.9, 7.4, 4.7, 5.9? So on his bad weeks, it's not like he's getting you 9.8, close to 10. He's getting you like under 6.
Yep. So that's the point I think we're both making.
Yeah.
If you're good with the ride, then draft Kittle. If you're not good with the ride, don't draft him, because the ride is going to happen. It's been year after year after year. We have just seen that. He had the 1 year with all the touchdowns, and he kind of was a little better in that one season. Yeah, but that was it. So the ride's there. The production at the end, the numbers are going to be nice at the end. Like Anthony said, if you're in a best ball draft, you don't even think about it. You're drafting 3 tight ends anyway, and so you get all the good weeks and the bad weeks. You're not going to have to worry about it. So there's definitely an advantage there. But in redraft leagues, for sure, Kittle is a dangerous player week to week. Isaiah Likely is next. And this is where the fantasy community and real football, there's a massive, massive disconnect. People saw the great production of Mark Andrews out, and I hear so many people on fire for Isaiah Likely this year. Oh, man, he is going to be a star this year. Here's what I want you to know. 9 of 11 games before Mark Andrews was injured, Likely had 10 or fewer yards. When Andrews is on the field, Likely is a non-factor. People will say, oh, but the Ravens run a lot of heavy personnel. Yes, 21, not 12. 21 means a running back. Patrick Ricard is on the field. They don't run the 2 tight end offense as their base heavy set. They do run sets with 2 tight ends, but it's Patrick Ricard often on the field, and that is when the heavy personnel kicks in. For Isaiah Likely to have any kind of good fantasy season, the entire offense would have to be reworked. And do you see a world, Anthony, where the Ravens are like, you know what? We got to rework our entire offense for Isaiah Likely? I don't see it.
No, absolutely not. Especially in a year where they bring in Derrick Henry, which tells me we want to run the football more. That's what bringing Derrick Henry and moving off of Dobbins finally and Gus Edwards finally and really bringing in, to me, Derrick Henry still a dynamic running back. So I like Isaiah Likely, but from fantasy football, he's literally a handcuff to Mark Andrews. And how I've been handling this situation, if I'm drafting Mark Andrews early in best ball, I usually don't want to carry 3 tight ends. And I think the optimal way to handle this, and I'll see how these teams finish, but like draft Isaiah Likely in the 18th round, the final round, and handcuff them that way. This way you have a Ravens tight end every single week, because between the two of them, you're getting a very high floor week to week. And obviously Andrews more so than likely will give you those pop games. But as far as a standalone fantasy value, Isaiah Likely is not it. He's too injury dependent.
Yes. And again, I urge people to understand the offensive system is not going to be reworked. It was the Ravens were putting up points at a high level last year. They have no reason to say we're going to burn it down and rebuild it. That's not going to happen here. And they, like you said, Derrick Henry's there, but they're not changing the game. They're just getting a better running back in the running back spot than what they had, which will make them even more efficient. So, all right, that said, Anthony, we got a little bit of time left. Let's talk about how our tight end draft strategy is this year. Now, I know that you mentioned earlier Kelce in the early, right, like in the third, late third, early fourth if he falls. Talk about that again a little bit.
Yeah, so I've been handling this because normally, year by year, we've been drafting Kelce late first, early second round. He's off the board. That is not the case. So let's bring in best ball, for example. So in best ball, we love to stack. This is one of those oddball years. And obviously, it has to do with down years for both the Mahomes and Kelce and the Chiefs offense. I think people are a little bit hesitant. I think people are loving the fact that there was a new guy, Sam LaPorta, that could finally take over, right? Everybody loves something new. So now we can get that Kelce Mahomes stack third, fourth round. I'm willing to pay, which is probably a 2-round discount on each every time. Now, obviously, if I'm drafting 20 teams, I don't want to leave 20 drafts with both of these players. But am I going to be overexposed until the market adjusts? Absolutely. Now, Jim said it earlier, it's not always optimal. You don't always love your team when you draft a tight end that early. But I think this is one of those years to make an exception for Travis Kelce, because if you're anything like me and you watched the end of that season in the postseason last year, Kelce is still that guy. And then they bring in some help with Worthy and Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, whatever's happening with him. There's going to be layups in the middle of that field and in the red zone for Travis Kelce. So I see another elite year. I see a bounce back year. And I think people are going to dread letting Travis Kelce fall to the fourth round.
So like you, Anthony, I'm not usually drafting my tight ends early. I will make a case like you for drafting Kelce, but I'm still probably hammering receivers there, and I'm going to miss out on the level of shares you have. But the reason you have is beautiful, and it cannot argue it for a second. But I know in a lot of drafts, if I'm drafting in the early fifth round, Mark Andrews is sitting there. Andrews was on pace for a 900-yard season last year, and that's about what he's good for. Now, he missed some time. He'll miss a few games, 2 to 3 games. He usually misses that a year. We're going to draft another tight end. Like you said, maybe it's going to be likely in the late rounds if I think I can hold a roster spot. But or I'm going to stream a tight end if that's the case. Whatever I have to do. I know there might be a couple games, but I want to point out that Lamar Jackson was getting better and better in Todd Monken's offense as the season went on. The majority of his multi-touchdown games came after week 12. The more of his 300-yard games, there weren't a lot of them, those were coming after week 12. And remember, Andrews has hurt them. Well, Andrews walks in now. There's another off season with Todd Monken. They're going to build on what they did the Ravens at the end of last season, and they're going to be more optimized when they start running the offense in year 2. Remember, the coach doesn't lay everything out in year 1. It's not even like possible to do. There are things you can add, different types of reads, some combinations you can add. And Andrews, in my mind, is still the number 1 receiver on his team. And I get it. People love Zay Flowers. I call him the screen king. He's a very good player. But what Andrews does, he's a seam stretcher. And Lamar has a live arm. He likes to be a downfield passer. And the other thing is, with all that heavy personnel the Ravens run, they are also, just like the 49ers, just like the Dolphins, they are very near the top of the league in average depth of target. And that is a perfect world for Mark Andrews. So I think Mark Andrews, and I like you, Anthony, he's my tight end too, because the floor, I believe, is exceptional. Again, we worry about a couple games of missed time, but I can live with that. That's not a problem. And so I said, I really love that call. Who else are you looking to draft, Anthony?
Some of the other tight ends I'm looking to draft. We already talked about Kyle Pitts. How about Dalton Kincaid? Let's throw Dalton Kincaid into the fire. If I'm looking at early tight ends, it's Kelce, Andrews, Pitts, and then there's also Kincaid in the mix. And I get it. Buffalo, they brought in a lot of help at pass catcher this offseason. Got, MVS, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir still there. None of those wide receivers, and we don't know who Coleman is yet, but I don't know if he's the number 1. But none of them right now, to me, are number 1 alpha wide receivers. Kincaid does somewhat, we do hear rumblings and comps out. Well, they want him to be the Kelce of this offense. They want to replicate the Kansas City Chiefs. I think there is a world where he gets a shot. And there's just some tight end strategies out there. If you're drafting a tight end early, make sure he's number 1 or has a path to be number 1 or number 2 in targets on his own team. That usually works out well. Well, last year, one that didn't work was Darren Waller. That's more of an outlier. A lot of other times, like Andrews, it's happened with Kelce. Evan Engram was another example, especially last season. He was number 1, I believe, amongst tight ends at targets. He was hyper-targeted on his own team. And I think this year, Dalton Kincaid certainly has an opportunity or a path to an opportunity to finish number 2 on his own team in tight ends. There's also a shot that he's the most targeted player on that team. And if that's the case, we could be looking at a top 3 or 4 tight end in PPR leagues.
The last high-end player that I'll talk about is Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys. You remember last year I told people take him in the 18th round, 17th. By the time August hit, you had to use a 12th or a 13th round pick again, but it was still cheap. I saw Ferguson as being a seam stretcher. I always know that Dak Prescott loves leaning on his tight end. Well, this year, Ferguson is going as about the tight end 8. It was tight end 9 earlier in the spring. Now he's moved up a little bit. But Jake Ferguson has still not reached his cap because of his ability to stretch the seam. And I also think there's a good chance Jake Ferguson's the number 2 receiver on the Cowboys. And remember, we learned in the week 6 bye last year, when they realized, Mike McCarthy and his staff realized the team couldn't run, they went uber pass heavy. Well, they only brought in Zeke Elliott and they let go of Tony Pollard. So that running game, not going to be any better this year. So from week 1 on, they are going to throw the football. And you saw Ferguson's numbers get better when Dallas went to that mode. So Ferguson is a big value. And again, Jalen Tolbert might have a little bit of a breakout. Brandon Cooks, he's over 30, played a little better in the second half. But all that said, there's a path where Ferguson's the number 2 guy in this offense. And so if you pass on those tight ends and you're waiting a little bit later, tight end 8, definitely consider to click them on. Anything quick on Ferguson?
I'm with you on Ferguson. Dallas didn't do a lot this offseason to help this offense. I think they're banking on maybe Jalen Tolbert taking a step forward. But when you're saying about possibly Ferguson being the number 2 in targets and number 2 pass catching option, I'm all with you here. And what's great about Ferguson, the one stat that stares at me every time, he was the number 1 tight end in red zone targets, and that is very, very valuable.
100%. Very quickly before we move out, I'm going to point out there's two quick tight ends I like late. And if Anthony, if you have somebody to throw in, definitely do that. Luke Musgrave's going as the tight end 17. Luke Musgrave was a very good passer. He had like 49 plus yards. I think it was 4 of his 9 games. And then he got hurt. And the offense had not hit its stride. Remember that Packers offense, first few weeks, they were kind of playing from behind. Then they went into a real funk for about 5 or 6 weeks. After the time, mostly when Musgrave was gone, that Packers offense took off. And I know Tucker Kraft looked good. He's the blocker. He was drafted to be the blocker. Musgrave was drafted to be the receiver. Musgrave had low snaps in the playoffs. He wasn't ready. He wasn't healthy. They forced him in. So Musgrave was playing 45 to 60 snaps a game. He gets his role back. I like him as a late round pick. And I also like Noah Fant as a late pick. I know. He had a couple of years near 700 yards with Denver. Then he went to Seattle. In the 2 years, there were 3 tight ends splitting all the work up. Well, they got rid of Disley. They got rid of Parkinson. Fant's the last man standing. And if he is given those 90 targets that he got in the Denver days, yes, he could get you that close to 700-yard season. He's a very talented guy. Any comments on either them or a late round quickie you've got?
I'm going to throw in a late round tight end. I'm drafting a lot, and I feel like I do this myself every year, waiting for the year to happen. And it's Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki now goes to Cincinnati. I love the situation. There's no more Tyler Boyd. He's versatile, can line up in the slot. Could this be the year? And I get he's getting a little bit older, but could this be the year that Mike Gesicki finally gets back on track? Because early in his career, he was an up-and-coming tight end, and then I think he ran into some issues because he's not the strongest blocker, and the systems he played for called for him to be a blocker. And now he's in Cincinnati, where I can see this team opening him up and using him more as a pass catcher.
Yeah, that's an exciting late-round pick for sure, because that offense can get rolling, and Gesicki could be back in the saddle. Hey, did you know RotoWire covers all fantasy sports? And did you also know you get a 2 free-day trial with no credit card needed to check out everything we have to offer? To get that trial, just go to rotowire.com/pod, see what we're all about. If you like it, love if you join the team. Also, Anthony and I'll be back where you're watching us on Friday. We're looking forward to another show then. We may sneak one in on Wednesday. Give us a little time on that. We'll post that up on the X machine. Remember, you find Anthony at the Real NFL Guru. You find me over at Jim Coventry NFL. And thanks to our sponsor, Prize Picks, the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. And thanks to every one of you for listening. Come back next week for another edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast.